I just finished my episode with Dr. Tommy Rhee talking about regenerative medicine and all things longevity. One thing that I want to tell you is it doesn't matter what age group you are currently in, this conversation matters. Everything you do right now or don't do is going to either set you up for great success in your later years or some pretty significant failure. My mom was just here house sitting for me and managed to trip and fall, even trip. I don't even know how she fell. But anyway, 9 stitches later on her forehead. Here's the thing: balance and flexibility and our ability to recover, our ability to not fall down, our ability to break a fall, an ability to fall well, all of these things start now. So listen, no matter how old you are, please check out this episode. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think there's something here for everyone. I don't know of one thing that matters more than your overall health and wellness, because without that, who cares how much money you have? Who cares where you live? Who cares what car you drive if you're dead? Well, no one. So let's refocus here on the truth of health and wellness, what it means, what longevity means, and what you can do to impact all of it. All right, stay tuned. Check out the episode. Hope you like it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Game Changer Podcast. My name is Michelle Dutro. I'm your host, and I am joined today by Dr. Tommy Rhee. We are going to talk all things longevity. If you listen to this podcast at all, you know this is a very common theme for me, and I love folks who come on the show that can vet out myths versus facts, what you should spend your time doing, what you shouldn't waste your time on. But before we dive in, let me give you a little bit about his background. I learned a little bit about his Navy career there a minute ago. He did spend a few years in the Navy, and he, as a U.S. Navy aircrew. Let me just tell you, it was more fun than my job in the Air Force. And he went on to become a chiropractor, was a chiropractor for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the UCLA Athletics before founding Regen and writing his book called The Future of Regenerative Medicine. He believes your body has far more capacity to repair itself than modern medicine usually gives us credit for. We agree on that topic completely. Whether you're recovering from an injury, dealing with chronic stress, or just trying to age without falling apart, this conversation is for anyone who's ever felt like their best years might be behind them. Oh, heavens no. We're going to learn that that's not right. Your best years are yet to come. With that, what did I not mention, Dr. Tommy Rhee, that the audience might want to know about before we launch into all things health and wellness?
No, I think you covered it right there. That's pretty much it there.
Okay. All right. Well, then we're just going to jump in. So you were in the military. You were not a chiropractor then. I heard that he was, tracking down submarines and keeping us all safe, which is phenomenal. Had quite an interesting career while in the Navy, and then went on to the reserves. And then after that, you decided to become a chiropractor. I'm always curious. You and I kind of both followed the same line: military, eventually getting into health and wellness. What was it about your interests or your passion that led you in the direction you're in now?
Well, I guess it started way before the military because my dad was a physician, a surgeon. And so I saw the interaction he had between himself and the patient. So it was set there in some type of like osmosis that's the path that I'm going to into because I see the interaction. I see how the patients appreciate my dad's care. And I knew that I wanted that sort of like relationship with this kind of working environment in my career. But I was a sports guy. I was very active. So I knew that it has to be including the sports side of it. So at a young age, I knew that I was going to go down that path. And once I got into sports and understood that, hey, there's a team doctor, there's a physical side of it, that's going to be my marriage to doctoring and sports together. So, like I mentioned before on other shows, I was the typical high school kid that had a little bit of, how would you say, a little bit of more like testosterone or anger or something. So it made me into this kind of like rebellious person. I mean, I still wanted to be someone, but when you have that, how would you say that social environment of being this ethnicity, and then you're raised in a country town of, predominantly white, there's that clash. So when that clash came up, well, of course, I'm lost and there was no reference point. So that became that person as far as a rebellious kid. So thank God the military straightened me out because that's the path that really set the whole cascade of where I'm at now. So with
Oh,
that, once I kind of got myself into the military and it taught me how to be disciplined, mind focused, identify your little goals and your large goals and work your way towards that. Then everything started opening up. Then I started to remember, okay, be a doctor, be that sports guy. And that's how this all became up. So that military was a big stepping stone that I had and I needed in my life and my career and where I'm at now.
very cool. What I'm curious because the intersection between athletics and let's just call it wellness can take a bunch of different paths. You could have gone into physical therapy. I mean, there's lots of different branches in working with elite athletes. What about chiropractic care, was an interest to you? Why that? Because that had to be part of what's gotten you into regenerative medicine and how you see the future of medicine and overall health.
Yeah. So when I was growing up under my dad's care, so that was my primary care guy, I don't remember ever taking any type of like pharmaceutical medication, any drug. He never gave me anything. In fact, when I used to get in a little trouble and I get caught, you know, somehow I got caught in some kind of fight and I would have these cuts on me. I wouldn't get that normal like anesthesia or some type of numbing, and then they do the old, sew you up and stuff. My dad said, "All right, you want to fight? Here you go." He would just go ahead and stitch me up right there in my hand. So I remember this one time, I had a bad like this cut on my hand from somehow my hand got in somebody's face or something. But anyways, something happened. So I'm on, how that typical
Uh,
an examining table where they have that white sanitation paper on the table and you
yep.
lay down there. So I'm laying down there and my dad's, sewing me up and the nurse is kind of staring at me saying, "Hey, you're going to be okay." And it was, you feel it nicking the bone. You feel this, incisions, but I would refuse to cry. I would not cry. And I was like, just holding it in, just flexing and just taking this pain. And, uh, and the nurse says, "Oh, what a brave boy. Look at him." And then, I get up, I see my stitches, I get up and I look back at the table and there's a big sweat body print on that piece of paper of me just tensing up. So,
Ah. Oh,
so,
that's
well,
funny.
that started the path of like thinking like, well, why my dad was in medicine, but he never gave me that course of that therapy. So as I started going into the military and then I see my surroundings as far as like what people have like a habit, drinking caffeine or doing some type of, you know, one pill solves all. And I started thinking, well, I didn't grow up on that stuff. So it's like, why is this predominantly the course of action in the medicine world or caring or what? Then when you start going into sports and you're understanding what sports are like really like the emphasis is not so much of the after injury, it's about the pre-injury, right? The prehab. It's about the preventative. Then they started talking about athletes having their own talent, their own cells, their own ability to do this kind of work. So it's about waking up that tissue. It's about really like stressing it out, having it recover, and then being that perfect person or an athlete. So that was all about your own body's ability to do its job if you put it in the right environment. And the only way I felt comfortable of doing that type of practice was chiropractic, because chiropractic has the ability to do the diagnosing side of it. You can treat. Whereas physical therapists, they can't really diagnose. They just basically have instructions from a primary care doctor that tells them what to do. So I was always taught when I was about to go in this world of medicine or something, my dad said, if you're going to go in this world, go to the top, be the doctor. Because when you're a doctor, you get the command of the diagnosis. You get the command of the therapy. So in my world, I wanted to stay in that sports world and have that innate intelligence, but an open channel to give the best ability of your own body to do its job. So it fit perfect. And that's why I went down this path. And that's why athletes love this, because they have the ability, they have the talent, they have the body. You just have to give it into the right environment to do that performance. And it fit just perfectly. And that's how it moved into regenerative medicine, because your body has that type of regeneration. You just have to give it the right signals.
So I'm curious, and in case you missed that, I did find that very funny that you said, I don't know, somehow my hand found its way to someone's face, which I think does set you up then for certainly elite athletes and people that play football, and they wind up finding themselves in all kinds of aggressive injuries, I'm sure. But that said, I'm curious well, let's just talk about elite athletes for a second, and then we're going to translate that into, the normal everyday average person. But I'm guessing you saw trends with folks that recovered faster, that maybe had a better likeliness of prevention of injury. And I'm curious what they were doing outside the field that you think lent itself to that. You mentioned coffee. So I'm curious if you saw people who kind of went out and partied a lot, people who then, had to drink 10 cups of coffee to try to get themselves going during the day. But what were the behaviors off the field that you saw translated to people that would have a quicker recovery time versus people that are going to struggle a bit more?
Yeah, so elite athletes, professional athletes, it's kinda interesting in their world because they have to go through stages, of course. You get the high school, college, and the professional world, and then, then you become the elite of the professionals. So, there's a group of people that have that mindset at the very start of everything. They already have that positive mindset that this is what I wanna do, and there's everything that I need to do to become that person, and that includes, like, the mental health, the physical, the nutrition, everything that they need to make that person exceed in their capability because they have the talent. So there's that group. And there's the other group that says, okay, I've got talent. I'm at that elite level without that time of training, that pushing, so that I don't need to do those extra stuff. They're the ones that have that lifestyle of like, hey, I can go out tonight, party, and then the next day I can go back and do practice and then still perform. But at a young age, you can get away with that. But if you want to make a good long career, you have to start preparing yourself as if you're in a later stage of your career. So you got a longer lifestyle in that sports. So when I see these elite athletes and I look at their behaviors, you have those two groups. You always will have those two groups. The difference is who lasts the longer. The ones that are disciplined, that understands about, your workout, your recovery, your nutrition, your mental health. That's the one that lasts the longest. So there's always that group. There's always those two groups that you're going to see in every level. But when you look at the elite, the ones that really have a longer career, that's the one that really tunes into everything. And these elite athletes, they have the team, of course, and the team has those type of things, right? Nutrition, workouts, everything you can think about. But they also have in their individual world, they have that team around them. They have their own nutritionist. They have their own therapist, their own type of coach, mental, everything you can think of in the team world, they have it for individual on that personal scale.
Right. So what the person that comes to mind, I'm sure it does for most people, is Tom Brady, who was meticulous about every single minute of his day and lasted obviously a very long time to make your point. But you also bring up something else that is, when we're in our 20s and 30s, the mindset is, well, when I get older, I'll take care of it then. I'll adjust my lifestyle. When I'm in my 40s and 50s, I'll tame it down then. But the reality is it's cumulative. And what we're doing in our 20s and 30s is setting ourselves up in our 40s and 50s. So, talk to us now about the cornerstone to longevity and aging, one of them, which is inflammation. So when we talk about pain and, then we get into arthritis and we get into all kinds of inflammatory issues, what are you seeing for the people that, especially if you're listening now and you are in your 20s and 30s, why this conversation matters? Don't hit fast forward and think, oh, they're not talking, this has nothing to do with me. Talk to that younger generation about why we are talking to them and why this does matter now so that your 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond go a lot smoother.
Yeah. So besides the inflammatory world, when you start at a young age from just fitness level, just for the cardiovascular, because I think everybody knows when you start off working out, it's not about health. It's about just your appearance, physique. You want to have that body that looks good. So it's a good precursor to the health component and the outcome of that. So the object is to have that condition in your body, understand that this is part of my life and this is what I want. And that mindset of being that good looking, physically fit, the muscle will slowly transition into the wellness world because you have to build that condition. So when I talk to people about like where they're at in their young self, in their 20s and 30s, and I see their lifestyle without any type of like form of exercise or some habit that needs to kind of ingrain in them, it's difficult when you get to this age, the 40s, 50s, to start an exercise routine because you're talking about years of that behavior over a long period of time, and you want to change that behavior into a regimen like 3 or 5 times a week to get up, to push yourself. You have to feel that muscle soreness and identify that's normal. outcome of a workout. You want to feel that burning sensation when you push and goes, I'm gonna quit. No, let me push a little harder past that threshold, recover, and then the next time you do that event, that exercise, you go beyond that. You're pushing that threshold. You want to keep on elevating that point of pain in the exercise, and you have to start there early. When you start that later, there's a lot of factors involved, not only about that mental side of the exercise, but you want the benefit of the exercise. But you don't want to push yourself because you're not familiar with that event after the workout or during the workout. So then you don't get the real benefits as if you had that type of like experience of that exercise when you're younger. So if I see a young person that doesn't set some type of like regimen or some type of program, do something. Either go in the gym and fake it and then make a habit of just showing to the gym. And then once you start going to the gym, you'll eventually go into the weights or some class or something and just do some type of daily habit. Younger people can recover a lot faster than me. I'm in my 50s, so my recovery is slower, but I got a lot of great muscle memory. I've got a lot of like that threshold of understanding where the pain is at if I push myself. So with me, it's easier to go into a workout for the cardiovascular, for the health reasons. Whereas if I had someone that just started out working out, their learning curve is going to be a lot shorter and they're more than likely to disappointment and their outcome is going to be poor. They just don't have it. So for younger people, think of yourself in your 50s or your parents' age and like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that. Set the standards now. And then it doesn't matter if it's just a simple exercise. Just put that together and then slowly evolve. That standard of that regimen at the very beginning will put you in the perfect environment. So when you get to this age, now you're looking at what you really want to do, the longevity, the wellness, the health. It becomes easier because you need to have the exercise of your vessels, your artery. You need to avoid that arterial stiffness, right? You want the ability to dilate, contract, because that will give you the ability to have that blood rushing from your legs to your head when you stand up, so you don't get that thing called orthostatic hypertension. You want that kind of like that healthy feeling when you get 50s, 70s, 80s, and then you're pushing to the hundreds. You need to stay those tissues, you need to stay everything healthy. So I hope that you guys at a young age keep working out, start it now, and just put yourself in some regimen where it becomes like just simple, like brushing your teeth in the morning.
So let's stick on that age group. So someone is listening and they're in the under 40 category. From, you wrote the book on the topic. What are some of the key things, exercise obviously being one of them, and an exercise routine, not just a weekend warrior kind of thing. So exercise routine being one, but somebody in their under 40, what are you seeing as, hey, if you're going to pay attention to these things that are going to make a difference in your longevity, what is that in your mind? And if you are going to say nutrition, then let's drill down on that. What specifically? So that by the end of the show, someone's like saying, okay, this is what Dr. Tommy says matters. I'm going to find a way to incorporate this in my life. So what are the things that you know for a fact are going to make a difference in the whole of their life?
Okay. So we know about food allergies. We know what happens if you take, like, for instance, if you're allergic to peanuts and you know what, you hear about those anaphylactic shocks and then you get the swelling around the neck and then you have to do the EpiPen. You hear the stories, right? Well, that's very easy because there's like a correlation between what you ate and then the quick response your body goes through with the actual, like the swelling and all that, right? So, but then you have to look at something that's very interesting in a chronic state, right? Chronic inflammation. That's probably the worst thing our body goes through. It pairs up with the parasympathetic and the sympathetic world. You don't want the sympathetic. You don't want that vasoconstriction and all the response from a sympathetic type of firing. So when you look at chronic inflammation, what's starting that off? Is it a stress? Yes, that could be possible, one thing, because the sympathetic is fighting off that stressor. Or could it be also something that you're not like allergic, but you're sensitive in the food? So you guys that have that feeling of the heaviness and you don't feel like you're at your 100%, you have to look at maybe getting your food sensitivity test done. Just look at what may trigger something. Because if you're sensitive to food, let's say I'm sensitive to cantaloupe, believe it or not, So I didn't recognize that, but when you take this test, typically what you see is that you eat the cantaloupe 2, 3 weeks later, you start getting that chronic inflammatory response where your body starts feeling heavy. So there's not that quick response from the intake of food to the response for what your body's combating. So do this test. So if you're dealing with a chronic inflammation due to a food sensitivity, well, you have to eliminate that food. Now, inflammation is a good thing when you have an injury. You need to have it come on board and you think about what you're trying to do. You're trying to inflame the area, protect it, and send more information or some building blocks to the area to do its healing. But afterwards, it should reduce. It should be removed and get out there, right? Because you don't want chronic inflammation or swelling or fluid in that particular body part, because now the signals you want to signal to do things like repair, you want to do some muscle activation. Well, it has to go through all that excess fluid. So you're kind of making, like, how would you say, like a construction site? You're not cleaning it up. You're keeping all the kind of like debris out there without having access for like trucks and all the like the repair people to get clear path. So you got to get that inflammation out of there. So for you guys that are at your young age, think about food sensitivity tests. There are easy tests out there. There's tests that you can do a fingerprint, and you take the test, mail it in, and they'll give you a list of about 500 foods, and they can pinpoint which one is sensitive and high, middle, or none. With that, start with that. Or see a doctor that's involved with that holistic stuff or some functional stuff. But you have to narrow it down to a point where you can link in that heaviness that you're feeling, but you can't identify what's going on. Start the easiest thing. So that's my biggest thing, is that inflammation in that chronic state from some type of food sensitivity world.
And I think that probably is very overlooked. I think that, people start to feel bloated or sluggish or heavy or slow and, maybe just, I don't know what they assume it to. Maybe they think, oh, it's the pizza I had last night, when maybe it's not the pizza, but I don't know, the anchovies, or maybe it was the cheese, or maybe it is the gluten. But to get that isolated is a very important component. That is fantastic. Now, we've heard exercise and establishing routine. Pay attention to your body's response to the foods you're eating is another one. Let's jump forward now. Now we're somewhere between 40 and 60. What is the most important thing at this age group to be paying attention to so that we can, in the most healthy way, make it between 60 and 80 and not be hooked up to an oxygen tank or need a wheelchair or whatever else it is, or a walker? What are the things in 40 to 60 age group that we need to focus on for those later years up ahead?
Yeah, good point. That's a good age group. That's almost like a transitional or a segue into that 60 plus, 70 plus age group. This is a crucial time. You have your second try, your second chance of becoming that person. Your first shot was in your teens, teens, 20s, maybe 30s. Now at 40s, you still got one more shot. That shot is getting to exercise. You've got to get that regimen. You've got a chance. At a certain age, when you hit 60 plus, you can't build muscle. It's impossible unless you're going into something else that, that increases that type of, the synthetic kind of form of forming that muscle. But when you start that 40-year-old, you still have the ability to form that muscle. That muscle will give you the longevity that you want to, because you need to keep the structure, you need the biomechanics, and you just need that kind of like that ability to be that person to get ready for the 60 plus. I tell everybody, if you don't set that particular age, if you don't set those parameters before you hit 60, like I said, it's very difficult. So for you 40s and you don't do exercise, you're not involved with that, this is your second shot. Go for it. You've got a good period of time to put those type of conditions and the behavior and the habits in form. So when you hit the 60s, 70s, now your body has that muscle memory. It can take it. Now, you hear about like when you see those 40-year-olds and they're like, oh, I'm still young. Well, they're the ones that are going to be very shocked and surprised. They're the ones that are going to be grasping at straws to become that person where it's going to be very difficult to create muscle. You'll go into this thing called a sarcopenia when you hit that age 60 plus, where you start losing muscle. That's why you don't see nobody in their 90s like a muscle, like a build. They don't have like a bodybuilder's body, because you start losing muscles. So you have to look at that side of that age group and say, develop that habit. Move forward and just try to think what's going to be like at your 70s. Just hang out with a bunch of 70-year-olds and see that group. And are you going to be this type of inactive 70s, or are you going to be the active 70s? And then Ask them questions. They're going to say the same thing we're talking about. You've got to create that behavior exercise. Healthy diet, of course, but exercise.
And, I think that older folks, the number one fear they have, or the number one fear their family has for them, is falling. And falling, I mean, let's take a look at balance, leg strength, ankle strength. These are all things that you can improve upon to not fall. Or if you do fall, to catch yourself, but you can't catch yourself without reflexes, without muscle, without strength, without balance, and all of those things take work. So that is fantastic. In your book that you wrote, what do you think, if somebody were to read your book, they would think was the biggest surprise or maybe a myth that you said, "Hey, I know this is a very common belief out there, but, really you ought to consider this, that, or the other." What are some surprises out of your book that maybe people aren't hearing on social media or hearing in the news regularly that you have discovered or that you're sharing in your book that people should pay attention to?
Okay, so I wrote the book starting back in 2022, way back, when I was involved with regenerative medicine, and I'm trying to describe the mechanism in some capacity what I was taught, but it didn't make sense. So when you start looking and you start doing research, and I want to be involved with this regenerative medicine, I want to take care of my arthritis in my knee. I was offered stem cell injections. Then they talk about the next thing is live cells. So when I'm researching this book and I'm going into the process and you hear about stem cells, different kind of stem cells, and then you see their potencies, like what do they do? How do they differentiate? That's the missing link. It didn't really describe the mechanism of how these cells that have a typical nucleus, it has a helper cell membrane, how does that turn into your cells? Well, as you go further into the study, you don't see those studies. You don't see the explanation. It says target tissue, mesenchymal stem cells, this tissue grows. Well, how? We don't know. They say it differentiates, meaning that it somehow knows that I'm going to turn into a tendon, a ligament. You can have 4 different tissues. It's going to turn into it. Well, then there was a big gap, a gray area. So it was like kind of like on its frontier world of trying to explain and understand about these cells, kind of like regenerating tissues. Then the book really goes into my thought process from there. It goes, well, if it's not about the stem cells mutating into your tissue, it's got to do something. And then you go further into it, and it's about the signals. These cells every cell secretes these things called EV, extracellular vesicles. This is information. Information to kind of tell the neighboring tissue or the cell to do its job. So then you start looking at that. That makes more sense because it doesn't have a nucleus. It doesn't have the ability to do its replication like a mitosis. All it does is looks for a target tissue, connects into it, makes sure the receptors fits in, and it's going to tell the target tissue do its job. And those target tissues from the muscle, tendon, ligaments, organs, they all have receptors. And then these information EVs go and tell the tissue what to do. That made more sense. So the book talks really about the whole evolution of stem cells and where we thought it was going to be from cloning into this world of mesenchymal stem cells, mutating into your own tissue, where now it's about the signal. Now you know it's a signaling. Our body is always about the signal. If it's hormones, peptides, something, we're always looking for a signal, right? So the brain secretes hormone, tells the target tissue to do something, and it's called the endocrine system. Well, in this world, since the cells are kind of close to each other, it's called the paracrine. It's basically kind of like telling the system right next to each other to do its job. So that's where this book talks more into the signaling. Signaling is important. And that's where you're going to start seeing right now the trend moving to this whole world from live stem cells into signaling. You're hearing these buzzwords like peptides. You're hearing these words of like exosomes, cell-free, bioactive biomolecules. Well, that was talk of a long time ago with my book. Now you're seeing it's catching up. That's where it's really mutating into, if you want to think that way, into this world of signaling. Signaling is the importance what our body needs. If it's anything better than our perfect cells, well, we need something that's perfectly matched up, a signal that's strong. If you don't have that signal, that cell sits dormant, just waiting for something to tell it what to do. So that's the missing link. Now we have factors as we age that our signals decline because we have aging, or we have that chronic inflammation that kind of clogs the actual channel for that signal to get to the target tissue. So those are the things that this book really talks about.
So, what are the things that can be done to increase that signaling or communication for the body so it can be more healthy and be more receptive, right? It's like someone's yelling, but you're wearing earmuffs. Well, no matter how hard they yell, if you've got noise canceling earphones on, you're not going to hear it. So, what are the things either that cause that miscommunication or lack of communication, or flip it around and say, what are the things that we can do to improve that in our life?
Okay. So the signal, let's say the signal is bright, strong, and we have a poor ability to transmit this signal to the target tissue. The target tissue has its own signal. It sends out information like, I'm hurt, I need something. And the first thing it does is it inflames. So inflammation is your worst enemy right now. That
Yep.
is what is causing that poor signal to get to the target tissue. Now, besides giving it better signal from stem cell therapy,
Right.
EVs, some topical something, if you're looking at just existing tissue and then the signals in your body, it has the ability, right? You just need to clear the pathway. So you first of all, just like we talked about that chronic inflammation, you got to get that reduced. Figure out how you can get to a good provider to find out what is that chronic inflammatory condition you're dealing with and reduce it. Then, if it's localized, it could be you need to get to a good therapist and know how to do the biomechanical movements to get that fluid flushed out so you can get that tissue healed if it's your meniscus, your ACL, because it's constantly inflamed. So, you need to figure out how to get the inflammation out either by a doctor, provider, or a nutritionist, and go get that educational component involved so you can reduce the swelling. So that's the biggest thing, inflammation. Now, if you're at the second stage where you have no inflammation, but now you're looking at the signal. The signal is weak. So what are you going to do? You only have so much signal. When you're 70, these things deplete. You have to introduce it with a larger signal. Just like you hear about these hormone therapies that people
Yep.
need to go in the testosterone world, right? TRT. Well, they feel younger. That's a signal. You're telling your body, hey, I've got this younger testosterone to tell my existing tissue, do its job. That's the greatest thing about this is that if you get the right signal to the right tissue, you're talking about extending your ages. You're saying 70, 80, you push it to 100, 120, 130. That's what's great about the future of all this
Right.
modern technology that's kind of like being pushed aside and looking at the real system is a signal. That's what's incredible right now.
Very cool. Now, for anybody who's listening and they're thinking, I want the book. I want to learn more. Where does somebody go to get your book to learn more about you? I'm assuming that somebody could work with you if they so chose. What does all that look like for you?
Okay, well, my book, Easy, Amazon, you can just type in the future of regenerative medicine, type my last name in, it pops up. And of course, there's the audio and the book. As far as me, go to my website, rheegen.com, and you can learn about the human tissue. Now, something that's going to be incredibly down the line here about my product. The signals are important from human tissue, mesenchymal stem cells. Well, the same signals are coming from plants. Right now, I'm going through some testing. We're doing some stability tests and some other tests to make sure it falls in line. Once we get that perfected, you're going to see this plant-based that does the same thing as the human tissue to signal your existing tissue. So I'm excited about the future of my product. So you can go on the website, rheegen.com, and learn about the human side of it, but be prepared. There's going to be a plant version of it soon.
Very cool. And how far out do you think that is? I'm excited. I want to learn more about that.
I'm crossing the fingers. I'm at the last stage of the certain test, and if it comes out positive, we're talking about November.
Oh, great. Okay. So that will all be in show notes. So if you're driving or jogging around right now, as you should be, then you can just, when you get home, check out show notes. Is there anything that I didn't ask about or we didn't chat about that from a longevity, health and wellness, regeneration standpoint, you want to make sure that people take away from our time together?
I think the biggest thing is that enjoy yourself while you're doing anything. So I guess the biggest thing is that If you're learning and you want to have that extended life, you want to be that active lifestyle span that you want at 100 years old. Well, educate yourself. These shows right here are perfect. Take the information that we talked about here and then put it into AI. See how accurate or how off I am. Just test it. Be your own educator and your own investigator too.
I love that. Absolutely. Be curious. And to circle back from the beginning of what you set up as a habit in your 20s and 30s is what's going to carry you through or not. So do something you enjoy, whether that's tennis, whether that's golf. If you hate going to the gym, I am one of those people, and you're not going to go, then that's not your thing. Maybe pickleball is, but there's going to be something that you enjoy doing that will feel more effortless to keep it going as the decades move forward. So I certainly know there's 70-year-olds on the pickleball court I could never hold a candle to. So, we can all find something we love that we can stick with into our 80s, 90s, and beyond. There's no doubt about it. So that is fantastic. I wrap up the show with the same question every time for everyone, so this is no different. So, Dr. Tommy Rhee, what is one thing that you absolutely believe to be true?
The one thing, if you never quit, you never lose. That's the one thing that I do. Never
All
quit.
right. All right. Said as a true elite athlete himself. And I would imagine that mantra holds well for all of the elite athletes that you work with. So that is great advice for all of us. I appreciate your time and your wisdom. This will all be in show notes so people can jump over and grab your book and learn more about what you have coming up. I'm excited. So I can't wait to keep track of what you've got going on and see about your new plant-based products coming out. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Game Changer Podcast.